Welcome to the latest in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. This webinar, Maximising Your Impact in Online Communications, is delivered in collaboration between NIHR Academy and Cath Baxter. Cath is a professional voice and impact coach, one of the leading voice coaches in the UK and a public speaking expert. Cath, I'll now hand over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Cath Baxter, and I am a professional voice and impact coach. And I'd like to welcome you to this training session, which, as Holly said, is maximising your impact in online communications. So before we jump into this training session this afternoon, I reflect on the fact that in January 2020, I would have been really surprised if I had to deliver this training session, because I was delivering seminars up and down the country about how to maximise your impact in terms of your communications within, obviously, a face-to-face environment. But as of April 2020, just like you, the majority of my communications became online. And although I had been teaching online for the last 5 years, it became really important to understand how I could help others to maximize their impact within an online environment. And so as we get into this training session, what I'd love to do is I'd love to get a check-in from all of you. I'd like to understand your reflections of working within an online environment. So I've got a couple of questions for you, a couple of poll questions. There's 4 questions that I would like you to reflect on, and I'll talk you through these as we go through. So here's my question for you. First of all, ask yourself, are any of these statements true or false for you? I find online meetings more tiring than face-to-face meetings. Is that statement true or false for you? I prefer my own camera to be off. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a choice, do you prefer a camera on or a camera off conversation? I notice the background when someone turns their camera on. Is that something that you notice and you pay attention to? And the last question is, I find it more difficult to read the room in an online meeting than I do in face-to-face meetings. Just take a second to reflect on those statements, asking yourself which of those may be true for you. And I'll just give you a little bit more time to answer those statements. Oh, we're getting the results in now. Fantastic. Oh, it's so great that there's so many of you here this afternoon, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this work with you today. So I think we've come almost to most of you have submitted your responses. So I'm just going to end the polling in around about 5 seconds. And I'm going to end the polling now, and I'm going to share the results with you. So let's have a little look at the results. So 66% of you are aware that you find online meetings more tiring than face-to-face meetings. And 34% of you, so that's around about a third of you, would prefer your own camera to be off in online communications, but there's a majority that prefers the camera to be on. There is around about 91% of you notice the background when someone turns their camera on. That's a really hefty majority. And 87% of you are also aware that you find it a little bit more difficult to read the room in an online meeting than you do in face-to-face. And there's some real reasons behind that. And over the course of this session, what I want to do is take some of these observations and help you to explain why you are finding some of these scenarios. So I'm going to stop sharing that with you now, and I'm going to end that poll there. So what are we going to be looking at this afternoon in today's session? I'm going to share with you the following. I'm going to share with you 7 deliberate actions to take that will enhance your impact within an online environment. I'm going to share with you how you can speak so that other people pay attention to you as you communicate your messages online. And I'm going to share with you how you can present your ideas online with gravitas and with confidence. So, who is this Scottish woman who is coming live from her home in Surbiton in southwest London? Who is this Scottish woman? Well, as Holly said, my name is Cath Baxter, and when I was 20 years old, I had trained as an actor and was working as an actor in Scotland. And around about 8 or so years later, I moved to London and I went to the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and I retrained to become a voice coach. And that was 18 years ago. So I feel like I've finally become an adult. And over those 18 years, for 14, I was head of voice at Mount View Academy of Theatre Arts, which is one of the top 5 drama schools in the UK. And there I was training actors in order to be able to work predominantly in the West End. And then what I did was I started to work with business clients, and I took what I learned within a business context, within a theatrical context, and I placed it into a business context. And that's what I want to be sharing with you today. I want to be sharing with you some top tips that enable you to keep people listening to you, that enable you to be able to create impact within an online environment. So this training session this afternoon is designed to be around about 40 minutes long. There's going to be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session, so please do put them into the question and answer box, and I will endeavour to answer as many of your questions this afternoon. As you can see, there is a PowerPoint, but I will be limiting the amount of slides that I share with you this afternoon, because predominantly in terms of the delivery of my messaging, I am the PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint is there to serve and underline the messages, but predominantly I want you to be able to see and view and hear how you can successfully create impact within an online environment. So we speak at around about 125 to 135 words per minute, but we think at many more words per minute. And many of you know exactly what that means, is that if it's an important presentation or if it's an important interview and you need to get your message across, there you are speaking at around about 125, 130 words per minute, but your brain is working a huge amount faster. It's really putting those messages across. And what you're hearing in your brain is this working? Is this person listening to me? Are they paying attention to me? Did I say the right thing? Is this the right slide? And often those mental messages can actually undermine our verbal impact. And so what I want to do is I want to help you to understand how you can focus your mind and focus it more positively in order to enhance your impact. And this is because I've identified that over the course of my career that there are 3 types of communication. There is unconscious communication, and that's where you just speak. That's where you just ask a question. Can I have a cup of coffee? Can you tell me where the train station is? You're not thinking about how you are saying it. And then there's what I call self-conscious communication. And that occurs when the stakes have risen, when you recognize that what you want to say is something important. And those messages start to happen in the brain as you're communicating your own verbal message. And then there's something that I teach, which I define as conscious communication. And that's a series of deliberate actions that you take to focus on not just what you're saying, but crucially how you are saying it, and who it is that you're saying it to. So that's what I'm going to share with you this afternoon. I'm going to share with you a series of deliberate actions that you can take in order to enhance your impact within your online communications. But many of these messages will also support face-to-face communications when hopefully we all return to our offices and our business places in the next year. So the first deliberate action that we're going to look at this afternoon is to ask yourself this question. Are you ready for your close-up? And within that, to ask yourself, have you checked your background? Now, why do I say check your background? The reason is because you don't want your background to become your foreground. In 2017, Professor Robert Kelly was preparing himself in order to deliver an online communication. He was being interviewed by the BBC, and he called his work in practice. He believed he was a talking head. He lived in Singapore, and he was talking about South Korean politics. And he had absolutely prepared himself for that meeting. He had thought about the environment he was in. He was being interviewed in his study. There was a lovely map behind him. The books were all out, made him look well read, well traveled, except he had forgotten one crucial thing. He had forgotten to lock the study door. And the next minute, many of you will know what happened. His little girl walked into the middle of that interview, bold as brass. 2 seconds later, his little boy came whizzing in on a rolling chair. And 3 seconds later, his wife threw herself into the middle of the interview and attempted to drag the 2 children out. Cut to 2020, and I think we all know what would have happened, or what we would have suggested, understanding these given circumstances that we all now work in, is that children may well be part of your environment, in which case you might just today pick the child up and continue with the interview. And perhaps had Robert Kelly done that, that video might not have gone as viral as it actually did. And so let's think a little bit about backgrounds, because you can see today that I'm employing a virtual background. And I'm employing a virtual background at the request of the NIHR in order to ensure that this webinar ties in with the rest of the webinars within the series. And there are some great advantages to using a virtual background, because it means that you can work with anywhere in your home and people are not aware of where it is that you're working. But there are also sometimes a few disadvantages to working with a virtual background. You can see that sometimes there can be a little bit of lighting issues that can become a little bit distracting in terms of the delivery of your message. So one of the options that you could do is to make the decision to share a real background. But again, there are a number of considerations that you need to think about. If you're sharing a real background, you want to make sure that again, that what's in the background doesn't become the foreground, isn't what arouses curiosity. So when it comes to real backgrounds, the less clutter that is in that background, the better. The more neutral it is, the fact that it arouses less curiosity. We've already identified that 92% of you this afternoon pay attention to the background, and the background can really enhance your impact. So all I would say is put your camera on before you go into that meeting and look at the background and ask yourself, are you happy with what you see? And if you're happy, then you continue straight ahead with that meeting. The next deliberate action that I'm going to ask you to consider is to ask yourself, where is your camera? Look at it and keep looking at it, because this is all about how to make eye contact in an online environment. So again, back in the real world, when someone spoke to us, we looked at them. And when we spoke to them, they looked at us. Eye contact was a really important part of communication. It showed that we were paying attention, that we cared about what somebody else was saying, but it came natural to us. The trouble is that within an online environment, eye contact is more challenging to make. So let me share with you some of the challenges of making eye contact within an online environment. So in a second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my laptop. So I'm speaking to you on a laptop this afternoon, and I'm going to move my laptop so that you can see some of these challenges. So prepare for moving, everyone. So my laptop is raised up onto a platform, and I'm now going to place my laptop in front of me. And I'm going to take my glasses off so that you can see what's happening with my eyes. So what happens for most people, if you haven't considered the position of your camera, is that when the laptop is on a surface, like a table in front of you, the camera has lowered. And what most people tend to do is they start communicating with the people in front of them on the screen. And often they might move in a little bit closer to the people who they're seeing in front of the screen because perhaps they're getting a little bit excited about it. And now you can see that the perception that you're receiving is that I'm looking down on you. And perhaps I've made myself look bigger. And I don't think that if you're going to effectively influence stakeholders, that anyone feels comfortable about someone looking down on them and feeling bigger than them. So what can you do? The most optimal place to position your camera is above eye level, just above eye level. And now you can see that, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see you all clearly. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just adjusting the camera height so that my head is just below the top of the screen. And this is so that you can see more of my physicality. Remember, you're in close-up, so you can see me really clearly and you can see what I'm doing with my physicality. But now it looks to you like I'm looking at you. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not looking at the main screen where individuals would normally be. The majority of my communications in online is looking direct at camera. Now, I absolutely know that this feels entirely counterintuitive because the people are on the screen. And frequently I get asked by my clients and by the groups that I work with, well, how do you read the room if you're not looking at the client? Well, you can receive a huge amount of information out of your peripheral vision. If your colleagues are nodding at what you're saying, then you can see that out of your peripheral vision. You don't need to look at them to see it. If, however, you see something that feels static, then you might just glance down to get a read on the situation. Then when the other person is communicating, you can spend more time looking at them. But always come back to camera when you are looking to influence the other person and deliver your messages. If you're looking at the camera, then you're making eye contact with your stakeholder. So the next deliberate action number 3, is again based around physicality and your physical presence. How you hold yourself, your posture, your body goes a long way to how your voice works, how you're able to project your ideas, how you're able to think clearly. And so what I want to share with you is a couple of exercises to think about how you use your body and how you can use your body optimally for online communications. So I'm going to ask you to do a little exercise with me. I'm going to challenge you to join in with this exercise because I promise you, no one else is looking. What I'm going to ask you to do is wherever you're at right now, whether you're sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, whether you're sitting at your kitchen table, or maybe you're in your office and you're looking at the screen, is I'm going to challenge you to count your breaths. I'm just going to ask you to notice your breathing, not to change your physicality, but wherever you're sitting right now, to notice your breaths. And when you breathe in, I'd like you to count 1 in your head. And when you breathe out, I'd like you to count 2. And I'd like you to just notice, but not change, 10 breaths. Let's start now. Now that's 10 breaths for me. You may have finished taking longer than that, or you may have finished in less time than that. But thank you for just noticing your breath. Now, the reason why I'm asking you to do that is that your breath can change depending on your physicality. And I've now been speaking to you for around about 20 minutes, and this is what you've seen on screen right the way through this training session. And this is where I sit every single day when I'm working with clients online and I'm working from home, exactly where you see me now. But it may surprise you to know where it is that I'm actually sat on my chair, because I sit somewhere very different from the majority of people when they're having an online meeting, or indeed when they're having a face-to-face meeting. Let me demonstrate. And now you can see how far forward in my seat I sit when I'm delivering my messages, either in a face-to-face meeting or in an online meeting. And what I want to share with you now is I'm now having to work 30% harder to be able to put my messages across. And that's because my abdominal wall has become tighter. There's more tension around my shoulders and my rib cage is not able to expand as effectively. I'm also not really able to make contact with the floor, which stops me from feeling a sense of groundedness. So let me show you what most people do. Most people pull their chair in towards the table, and now you can see that you have a similar shot to what you saw me before. But what I can tell you is that only the tips of my toes are able to touch the ground, and I'm feeling again still that tightness around my abdominal wall. So what is optimal? What is optimal is to push your chair away from the table and bring yourself to the edge of the seat. And then check that your feet are flat on the floor underneath your knees. And I'm going to challenge you and ask you to do this for yourself now. So if you're sitting on the couch, bring yourself to the edge of the seat on the couch with a lovely long back and checking that your feet are flat on the floor. If you've got an office chair, push that chair away from the table and bring yourself to the edge of the seat. Even more so if that chair moves, because you want to stabilize the chair, because a moving chair can really distract from your messaging. I'm going to share with you a bit more of my physicality. You can collapse into your pelvis, or you can lift out of your pelvis. I'm going to ask you to lift up and out of your pelvis. Place your hands on your thighs with your hands and palms face up towards the ceiling. And now give yourself a bit of space under your armpits. Check to see that you're not holding your arms close to your body, but that you have a bit of space under your armpits. And now that you've adjusted your physicality, I'm going to ask you to do the breathing exercise again. And count 10 breaths, please. Now, some of you may still be breathing, and some of you may well have noticed that you were able to breathe a little bit more deeply, and you were able to get more air into your lungs. And if those things are things that you noticed, then I can assure you that being able to breathe more deeply helps you to be able to think more clearly. Being able to breathe more deeply creates less tension in your body so that your voice is clearer. So deliberate action number 3 is to sit on the edge of your seat. Let's have a little bit look at deliberate action number 4. Deliberate action number 4 is all around this quote by Immanuel Kant. He's a German philosopher, and he said that the hand is the visible part of the brain. And in online communications, you want to make sure that your hands can be seen. Let me explain why. Gesture is a form of emphasis. You don't need to get yourself louder in order to make your point. you can literally punctuate your messages with gesture. And when you bring your hands into shot, it allows the other person to see more of your communication. The only thing is, it's more challenging to do it in an online environment. Because if you just mirror where my hands are right now, you can see that they're far higher than where you might normally hold them in a face-to-face meeting. Because in a face-to-face meeting, you would normally hold your hands around your navel area. So let's just see what happens when you hold your hands in a navel area. Well, what's happening now? So I'm still giving you gesture, but now what you're seeing is you're seeing what happens at the top part of the body, but you're not actually seeing the hands moving. And when I do this and someone communicates like this, I like to think that I look a little bit like a thunderbird. I feel like I'm harnessing Lady Penelope right now because you're only seeing this top part of my body doing. Alternatively, I might not use my hands at all. And instead, what happens in order to be able to deliver my messages is I start to use my head. And again, that's not really effective for putting your message across. So what is more effective? Bring your hands into shot. Now, you have got to be a little bit careful because the minute those hands move towards the camera, they get bigger. And so if you're really excited, you can put your hands towards the camera and you look like you've got massive hands. Not exactly optimal if you're looking to influence your stakeholders. So like other people, I've really had to learn how to limit my use of gesture. And how have I done this? I just practiced. I put the camera on, I started to deliver my messages, started to practice my presentations, and I really looked at what my hands were doing. And yes, moving the hands out is around about the breadth of gesture that you've got. But those hands are so important in terms of being able to communicate your message. So deliberate action number 4 is to make sure that your hands can be seen. The next deliberate action that I'm going to ask you to take is all around the issue of saying less. And I want to share this quote with you from Thomas Jefferson. The most valuable of all talents is that of never using 2 words when one will do. And we all know that individual within your organization who says less, but when they speak, people listen to them. It's not the person who waffles and makes lots of sound but doesn't necessarily get anywhere. It's someone who is succinct, somebody who is in control as they deliver their messages. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to challenge yourself to become more succinct. But how can you do that? Well, the key to becoming more succinct is to pause and to think before you speak. Now, what I want to assure you is pausing isn't this. Cath told me to pause in my communications and I'm doing that. And now I'm going to take a breath and now I'm going to start speaking again. Pausing is silence. Pausing is breathing. Pausing is thinking about what you're going to say next. And pausing is such a valuable tool to learn. And right the way through this training session this afternoon, I've been employing pauses. And what you'll have also noticed through this training session is that I very rarely employ hesitation sounds, ums, ers, ahs, that clutter up our messaging. Instead, what I do is I pause and I give myself time to think about what I want to say next. And that's so crucial to finding fluidity in terms of your conversation. Other things that people do when they're communicating is they will hesitate as they communicate and they will hold on to words. And so what you get is the person who lengthens their sentence by holding onto a word in order to give their 1,200 to 1,400 thinking words more time to process and find the words to speak. And what's more optimal is to pause. Because when you pause, what happens is your rate of speech slows down. That's the most common thing I get asked. Cath, how can I slow down my rate of speech? Pause. Take a breath. And when you punctuate your sentences with pauses, it slows down the rate of speech. But it also gives the person who you're influencing, the stakeholder, time to process what you're saying. The other wonderful thing that a pause does is it says that you're in control. Because the assumption is that when the stakes are high, that you will be experiencing adrenaline. And if you can pause, what you share is the fact that you can handle adrenaline. Because when we experience adrenaline, we tend to speed up. We tend to employ more hesitation sounds. So if you've practiced pausing, you can present yourself as being more in control. And that's what I do, and that's what I get my clients to do all the time, is to practice pausing. But how do I do this? Well, the next meeting that you go into, what you're going to be doing is simply describing things, describing the action that you took last week, describing the actions that you want to happen next week, describing the strategy for 2021. Everything is a description. So what I get my clients to do is to play a describing game. And this is the game that I get them to play. And the game is called Articulate. And in the slide deck, I've got a link that you can play this game online. And on this card, there are a series of words. And what I do is I get my clients to describe those words. But they have to describe them without going, this is a person, or, so, right, okay, so this person is, but become more succinct. Pause before you start to speak, because it gives you time to process what you're saying. So practicing pausing is a great way to establish your credibility and influence in online communications, but in face-to-face communications too. And in this webinar, I'm also going to share with you in the slide deck a link to Justin Trudeau speaking on a YouTube interview. And he was being interviewed about Donald Trump, and it was a very serious interview. And Justin Trudeau took 23 seconds to pause. It's quite extraordinary to look at. And I urge you to look at this 23-second pause, because the first part of it is beautiful. He just breathes in and out as he's asked the question. But there are a couple of leaks of his anxiety. He goes, then he starts to, and then he stops again. But eventually, because he gave himself enough time, the good words come. So pause, practice pausing, and think before you speak. The next deliberate action we're going to look at taking is deliberate action around voice and communication. Deliberate action number 6, make the last word in your thought as strong as the first word in your thought. Now, what does that mean, and where does this come from? Making the last word in your thought of becoming the first word in your thought. Well, this is based on the fact that individuals, when they speak, they have a tendency to trail away towards the end of the sentence. It's the most common habit of verbal delivery in the United Kingdom, and it's called falling off the line. And basically it means that the voice loses pitch or loses volume before the end of the sentence or the thought. So let me give you an example of this. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cath Baxter, and I'm a professional voice and impact coach. And I'd like to welcome you to this session this afternoon, which is entitled Maximising Your Impact in Online Communications. You know, it's so important to be able to understand how you can communicate within an online environment. And so just checking and noticing the fact that my voice is now trailing away towards the end of the sentence. The trouble is that you don't finish your sentences with if, but, then, who, and is. You finish your sentences with your key message. So if your voice is trailing away at that point, ultimately, your message doesn't land as effectively. And so the key is to make the last word in your thought as strong as the first word. Now, why does this trailing away happen? It simply happens because you start thinking about what you're going to say next before you've actually finished articulating the thought that you are on. And so the challenge here is pay attention to the ends of your sentences, because that's where you make your point, and make sure that you are able to sustain that energy, keep yourself focused right the way through to the end of the sentence. The next thing that I want to share with you this afternoon is around an issue that's happening a lot, because this afternoon 33% of you identified that you would prefer a cameras off conversation. So let's just talk about what you can do when the cameras are off. Unfortunately, the first thing that I want to share with you is, if it's possible, I would encourage a camera on conversation. And the reason is simple. You can gain so much more information by being able to read your stakeholders' body language and physicality as you're delivering your messages. Also, with the camera on, you're able to see what you're doing. You're able to see what your hands are doing. You're able to see whether or not you're making eye contact with the camera. You can get so much information. So the first thing that I would say is, if it's possible, switch the camera on. However, sometimes that's not always possible or not always appropriate, or all the other stakeholders have their cameras off, and so you simply join in. So what can you do then? Focus on what you can control. And this training also applies to telephone conversations, because what you are in control of is your voice and your body. Sit on the edge of the seat. Bring yourself. In every telephone conversation I ever have, I'm always sat on the edge of the seat, because I know it will let my voice deliver itself most effectively. Keep yourself mentally energized, because if you keep yourself mentally energized, your voice responds, and your voice will follow that mental energy, and you'll have more range, which is so crucial when we can't see the physicality. Increase your emphasis on keywords. My voice coaching pal, Stera, talks about words as containing juice. Squeeze the juice out of your words. Increase your use of emphasis, because it will really help the other people to follow what it is that you are saying. And finally, if you find yourself having to dial into a conversation where your camera's off and everyone else's camera's off, and you can't see or hear who is speaking, then encourage everyone to say their name before they start to make their point, so that everyone in that conversation can follow the conversation that's going on if you can't see the other people and you're involved in a group call. The final deliberate action that I want you to take, and I suggest you take, is to avoid death by PowerPoint. Now, we all know that in this online environment, with the screen sharing possibilities, it's so easy to just share your whole deck that you've put together. And I too have done exactly the same thing. So in late March 2020, working from home, I got really excited about the fact that I was going to be working with a client, but she wasn't going to be able to see my PowerPoint. But then I remembered that I could use this screen sharing facility that Zoom had created, and I was very excited by it. And so I went, okay, I'm just going to share the same deck that I've always shared with my clients face to face, but I'm going to do it online. And here's what happened. I watched my client in the corner of my screen slowly go like this. And I thought to myself, how on earth is this happening? I am really good at keeping people's attention. How is this happening? Well, simply it's because she was looking at a static screen and I was the much smaller version in the corner of the screen. And it really led me to understand that the more information that you share on a static screen, the less likely you're able to sustain the interest of your listeners. So in an online environment, I absolutely limit any slides that I share. And if I was going for a longer period of time, I might share video or use interactive whiteboard, or like I did today, I use a Zoom poll at the top of the session to engage the other person. PowerPoint, an extended PowerPoint, is not effective in this environment. So I would urge you to limit the amount of slides that you share in an online environment. Send the full deck before or share the full deck afterwards, but be aware of sharing too many slides within an online meeting. So what have we looked at this afternoon? Let me share with you our deliberate actions for maximizing your impact online. Deliberate action number 1, asking yourself, are you ready for your close-up? Check the background. Deliberate action number 2, find your camera and look at it so that your stakeholders feel like you're making eye contact with them. Deliberate action 3 is that physicality affects your vocality. Sit on the edge of your seat to create impact online. Make sure your hands can be seen. They don't have to be massive, but just make sure that they can be seen. Pause. Think before you speak. It will allow you to declutter your message and find more control over your verbal delivery. Make the last word in your thought as strong as the first word. And right the way through this training session, that's exactly what I've been doing, is paying attention to the ends of the sentences. Exactly the point where I make the point. And finally, deliberate action number 7, avoid death by PowerPoint. Now, before I finish and hand over to questions, and I can see that there's lots of questions here, what I want to do is I want to let you see backstage. I want to let you to understand is that our homes were not invented for us to be working in a professional environment. And although I'm a professional communication person, what I wanted to do is share with you what steps I've had to take in order to be able to deliver this webinar online, live from my home in Surbiton. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the virtual background. So this is where on a day-to-day basis, I deliver my messages. And this is deliberate. There's nothing going on really to arouse curiosity. There is a picture of Paris there, if you've noticed. And usually I just angle it slightly so that whatever you just saw there in the corner is not in the shot. Now, I can make it a touch more interesting. I could literally put a plant pot here, and that might make a green plant a little bit more interesting. But the reason why it's like this is because I want you paying attention to what's going on in the foreground rather than the background. But it may surprise you to know where it is that I'm actually sitting in my house, because this is not where I work. Where I work is in my kitchen because I've got a lot more space. I work here because this is the most appropriate background that won't distract attention from my messages. So I'm now going to turn the camera around so you can see where I am in my house and how it is I've been delivering my messages to you this afternoon. So here goes. Here we go. Now this is the chair that usually sits where I'm currently sitting right now. And this is my kitchen, where you can see there is a huge amount of light. And that is not effective for my online communications. And what happens when I turn the computer around all the way is, yes, ladies and gents, you can see that I'm sat in my hall. And not only that, I'm sat on the edge of a sideboard. And the platform that my computer was sitting on was Rick Stein's Spain and Jamie's Great Britain. And here is the PowerPoint that I've been using to prompt me for the rest of the webinar. And this is my setup for this afternoon. And I wanted to share with you that your setup doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be able to do the job. And so now what I want to do is I'm going to listen and take the opportunity to answer any of the questions that you've got about my role as a voice coach or the work that we've looked here this afternoon. And with that in mind, I'm going to turn off the distraction and put my virtual background back on and see my beautiful friend in white here. We're twins today, Holly, who is going to help me to go through any of the questions that you may have for me this afternoon.
Great, thank you so much, Cath. It's such an interesting session. Already we've had some feedback in the chat about how useful people have found it. So on to the questions. We've got 10 that have been asked so far. If anyone wants to add any extras, they can, and also voting for the questions that have been asked already. So the number one question that we have is, how do you handle pauses when others will jump in when you've given any space?
That's a really great question. If you are taking a pause and you are going to say something else, then that pause is clearly filled. So you can see, I just took a pause there, Holly. You could see that I was going to say something else. But if it does happen that you're in a thinking pause, because usually a pause takes around about a second or a second and a half, if someone does interrupt you, how do you handle that interruption? Thank them. Thank them for the interruption and say, can you just hold that thought? I will address that at the end of this point or the end of this sentence. So what I would always say is, if you're being interrupted, just acknowledge the interruption, but check, is the interruption designed to derail the conversation, or is it designed to enhance? And so if it's designed to enhance, basically go, thanks for that, absolutely, I agree. And if you think it's derailing and taking it off someone else or off somewhere else, then simply say, hold that thought, and I will address that after I've finished making my point. But a good pause, most of us can see that something is going to come next. So please don't have that anxiety in relation to practice pausing.
So another question here, which is very similar, which is when you're in a meeting where everybody wants to talk. So although you might want to acknowledge that pause, they're just waiting for you to stop so that they can jump in, and that feels like everybody in the meeting is in the same position. How can you handle that?
I think then it comes back to good chairmanship, ideally, of the meeting, is who's running the meeting and what parameters have you established for how you're going to be able to put across your messages. And I think in an online environment, what is optimal is that everybody's entirely clear about the standard practice for putting their points across in a meeting. And so it can be really useful to have a chair or to nominate someone who's going to run that meeting. And then utilizing your chat feature, utilizing your virtual hand to give an indication that you want to speak is probably the most productive way of running those meetings. And if you do find that there are lots and lots of people chipping in, I would urge you to reflect on that meeting and then see if there's something more optimal that you can do for the next meeting. Catching behavior is the way to change behavior.
Really interesting. So for this person, next question, what are your tips for being more succinct in your communications and to stop hesitating when you're speaking? Because this person finds that they overthink, but then when they actually start speaking, they waffle.
It is to pause. It's to pause. It's to practice pausing, because when you pause, you do give yourself time to think. But the amount of times I start that exercise with clients and I say, take a pause, and they go, okay, take a pause. And you go, no, take a pause and breathe. And it's essentially get comfortable with silence. Get comfortable with the fact that what you've got to say is important. And if you're giving yourself some messaging that what you've got to say is not important, then you're likely to pick up the pace. You're likely to add extra words. And when you pause and you get comfortable with giving yourself time to think, I promise you that you give yourself a huge amount more control. And honestly, I learned how to pause, because I was about to say another word. I learned how to pause by playing that game Articulate. I wouldn't share it with you if it didn't work as a tactic.
Great, thank you. Question here from somebody. Any tips for a nice way to wrap up a meeting when it's getting to time and people are still talking?
If you're chairing the meeting, you may want to, again, use the hand raising feature. Or if you're chairing the meeting, if you want to be really bold and you don't really care what everyone else is thinking, stick them all on mute. Stick them all on mute and say, we've got another 5 minutes. Just want to keep you to time. Unmute and let them. I can be quite bold and quite Scottish. That's probably the tactic that I would take. But, you know, simply using the hand raising feature, taking the opportunity. I'm a real stickler for time. As you saw, I've got my time here on the side because I know you guys are all busy. I want to make sure that these messages are conveyed to you within the time that we've got allocated. So it is really important. It's professional to stick to time. So you're absolutely right to indicate that, and perhaps also indicate it at the top of the session. It's really important that we stick to time. I am going to interrupt you at the end of the session today and let you know that we've got 5 minutes, and that will give you the permission to jump in and go, okay, 5 minutes, everyone.
Excellent, thank you. I love the idea of the bowl. Just mute them. Take control of that meeting.
That's the Aberdonian in me. What can I say?
So this is another interesting one. So again, I think if you're chairing a meeting and you notice that people's attention starts to slip, and they're potentially reading emails, doing other things, not really listening, how can you bring them back in and refocus their attention?
I think the first thing that I would do is catch that behavior and notice it, and then reflect for the next meeting and simply ask yourself, did everyone in the last meeting need to be there? And did everyone in the last meeting need to hear all of those messages? Because if you're having a meeting that people are utilizing as an opportunity to read their emails, see their notifications, and look at their mobile phone, then obviously some of the content of that meeting isn't important to them or isn't important enough. And so I think there's some reflections to be done. And I think that goes right the way across the country in terms of how many meetings we have online, what's the necessity for those meetings. But if the meeting is important, then challenge the people who are within that meeting to turn off their notifications and keep the meeting brief so that people are able to actually identify, is this meeting necessary, therefore I need to not be looking at my mobile phone, having my lunch at the same time, or doing those. So I think it's about management of meetings will ensure that individuals are engaged right the way through. What I would say is that you can't fake looking at your emails in an online meeting. You cannot look at your emails at the same time as pretending to be able to listen, and it's because you're in close-up. So if I start looking at my emails here, you can all see immediately that I've looked away at the screen. The minute that you're looking away from the screen, maybe I'm looking at my phone down here, it's in close-up. We can see it. So if you want to make sure that you're telling your management or people above you that you're interested, you've got to turn off your phone, because you can't fake it in an online environment. I'll put my glasses back on now, Holly, so I can see you.
No, great advice. I think particularly thinking about, does everybody in a meeting need to be there? Because I think we've all had experience of that overkill of meetings at the moment.
Yeah.
Someone's asking here, does what you wear matter? And do you have any recommendations?
Well, you and I had both considered what we were wearing today. And that's because, you know, we've got this virtual background here, which has a lot of little bits of imagery. And I came to the conclusion, as Holly came to the conclusion, that you can't wear pattern on pattern. I think you'd agree with me there, Holly. And that's why we went with white to pick this out. So if you're working with a virtual background, consider what you're wearing that doesn't particularly clash. But if you're working, as I was earlier on, with my real background, then I would say just something that isn't so bold that it becomes the foreground. But a great bit of colour can be really fantastic in an online environment. Maybe not big earrings, because again, they can sort of slightly detract from your messaging. I would just say that I like a bit of colour generally, but why am I wearing white today? And why is, I guess, Holly wearing white? Because there's white in our background and we get a nice contrast to it.
Great, thank you. Question here about your stance on standing during an online presentation.
Absolutely brilliant. The only reason why I'm not standing in this online presentation is just generally speaking because of the space that I've got to be able to do it in my own home. So in my own home, what is easier and more optimal for me to create impact is to sit. But if I'm delivering a presentation face to face, every single one is on my feet. So if you've got an environment where you're able to deliver your messages on your feet, fantastic. But make sure you're still as you do it. If you're delivering messages standing up, the body needs to be still. You need to be grounded and rooted. If you're wandering around and chatting to your audience and all that, that is distracting from your message. So standing is great because it can ground you and you can feel more confident, but just be aware of moving back and forth because that can be distracting as you're in close-up.
Great, thank you. Is there any danger that by becoming polished speakers, we sometimes lose spontaneity and sincerity?
I think that giving yourself control and control over your thinking as you communicate allows you the space to be spontaneous. And essentially it allows you to pick up the pace and be, really truthful and authentic to you and have all of that. But at the point at which you need to make your point, that you've got control and you're able to control your adrenaline. So, there have been plenty of times through this webinar this afternoon that I've got really excited, picked up my pace and given you something that's much more Scottish. But I can also take a breath, slow it down, and be really clear and deliberate about what I'm saying. And I think that's really what the skill of being able to use your voice and the skill of being able to master your body, your breath, and your thinking plays into professional development. And this is what I do every day, is I help individuals like you, Holly, and individuals within your organization to have that degree of confidence that allows authenticity to shine, that allows you to be the controlled, the spontaneous you.
So this question is linked, I think, which is the fact you talked about gravitas, and this person's father oozes it, a good Scottish Presbyterian. But the person worries that their voice is more chatty and feels less serious. Mm-hmm. Any suggestions about how they can overcome those feelings or improve their voice?
So what they've just identified, chatty, great rate of speech, good use of range, warmth, curiosity. These are all the things that we would attach to somebody who was chatty. So you want to keep all of those things, but you also then just want to learn how to manage your rate of speech, to be able to slow the metronome down a little bit at the point at which you want to influence. And when you slow it down, your breathing slows down. And what ends up happening is you end up creating a bit more space. So you get a bit more lower harmonics, which tends to indicate that you've got more gravitas. So I can get really excited about delivering and totally have a great chat. Or I can take more time and convey something different. And basically what I do is I give people the option of being able to do both, basically control over this instrument.
Great. You spoke earlier about how being mentally energized comes through in the way that you speak and the impact that you can have. And someone's just asking here, how can you keep yourself mentally energized? Are there any tips?
Be curious. Listen to the other person. Everything I've talked about, and let's be honest and pragmatic, it is not for every conversation that you have online. This is about the times that you need to influence. If you need to influence, then it's worth the 30 minutes of you staying mentally energized. And it's when you put the phone down or you turn off the camera that you can go away and do what I'm going to do in 2 minutes' time. And just go, right? Because what I've just done this afternoon is mentally tiring. But I've curated my day so that I'm able to give this level of focus and attention. And so it is about managing your time and recognizing what are the important conversations, and give yourself the time to be able to focus your energy for the time when you need to influence.
Great suggestions. This is harping back, I think, to what we were talking about right at the start of the Q&A, about how you can break into conversation when people aren't letting others speak, and you've lost the ability to really use your body language in the same way that you would in a face-to-face meeting.
So hand raising feature, first of all, stick that on because it's really great and bold. Then physicalize it. And if you want to get really stroppy, use your body, indicate, move closer to the camera, make yourself bigger on screen, indicate that there's something that you really want to say, put your finger up, even if you need to kind of if you jiggle around a bit because you're in close-up, you can indicate what it is that you want to say. So yeah, what is the most professional? Use the hand raising feature. But if you feel that you want to raise the ante, use your physicality in order to be able to indicate it too. So if you've been sat like this, by doing this, you are literally moving and indicating that you want to say something.
Definitely makes sense. We've got 2 questions here that are linked. So how do you fight nerves for these kind of presentations and meetings? And someone's saying that for them, when they're nervous, their pitch goes up. And is there a way to control that?
The simple answer is yes. There is a way to control it. It is about learning to manage your breathing and learning to lower your heart rate. But there's also a mental process as well. My husband knows when I'm going to be doing a webinar from home, because I start walking around the house going, I am excited. I am excited. I'm excited, honey. And he goes, oh, are you doing a webinar this afternoon? He works in IT. And I go, yes, honey, I am doing a webinar this afternoon and I am excited, because that is much more empowering than walking around the house going, oh, I'm feeling a bit nervous this afternoon. And there is no difference in the body between the 2 experiences. You feel exactly the same in the body with excitement as you do with nerves. And so if you tell yourself that you're excited, your body responds. And truthfully, that's what I've been doing for the 25 minutes before I came online. I was saying, I'm excited about this. I'm excited to share my ideas because I experience adrenaline just like everyone else. It's completely natural, but it's how you harness it and how you manage it. So absolutely, there are tricks and tools. And anybody who's watching this afternoon, get in touch with me if you'd like to find out more information about that.
Excellent, thank you. That's an absolutely fantastic tip. I'm going to try it out myself next time I'm scared. I'll be excited instead.
Exactly.
So next question, what are the best ways of adding emphasis to your sentences?
It is about squeezing the juice, squeezing. You've got to think more about what you're saying. And I have been using an increased form of emphasis right the way through the session. And that's because at this moment in time, I am not thinking about anything else other than what it is that I'm saying. And I'm focused on how I'm saying it. I'm not thinking about the next sentence. I don't need to because I'm a subject matter expert. When I take a breath in, I'll get there and I know what I'm going to say. So you give yourself enough time and then find the good words. And essentially, you want to make words sound like they mean. And that's what I just did there on that sentence. I made each of those individual words sound like they mean. And how did I do it? I paid more attention to what I'm saying. I didn't just say it. I paid attention to it.
Fantastic. Last question.
Okay.
And it's a tricky one. So how to minimize PowerPoint presentation death when you're teaching in a mixed environment? So some people in the room and other people online.
Well, the people in the room have got an easier time because they're able to have more information to process, so they don't get distracted as easily. So in the room, they're looking at the PowerPoint, they're looking at the person, they're looking at the other people. There's lots and lots of things to take away. But in the online environment, obviously they're limited to the slide deck. I think you've just got to really ask yourself, how much information do I put on the slide? I want to remind you, the slide deck are not your prompt notes. It might mean that you need to do more preparation. That slide deck is there to support and to help the other person keep on track. It's not to bullet point every single point that you've made. And you've seen me do this afternoon. I've made at least 6 comments about each of the actions that I've asked you to take. I didn't have to put them on the slide deck in order to share that with you. There is a fuller deck that's going to be available to you this afternoon. So I would challenge you to perhaps put more preparation in and really consider how much information you need to share on that slide deck.
Yeah, great points, thank you. And those of you that are attending live, if you want to get the slide deck, if you fill out the questionnaire that we've shared in the chat, or that will pop up at the end of the session, we can get your email address and then we can send that through to you. So that is the end of the Q&A. Cath, thank you so much for that session. I think really interesting, really engaging. We've had some great feedback already.
Great stuff.
To everybody who's attended, I really hope you've enjoyed the webinar and feel able to apply some of the learning from the session to your own experiences. And if you've enjoyed this webinar, you can find all of our past webinars on the NIHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support Webinars playlist. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.